The transport ship dropped through the purple clouds of Veros Prime, and Jake Morrison pressed his face against the window. Below him stretched the Interstellar Coalition Training Academy, a massive campus of gleaming buildings and green spaces that seemed to go on forever. Beside him, Katie Stevens was reading through her welcome packet for the third time, her fingers tapping nervously against the datapad. "First humans ever accepted," Katie said, though she had repeated this fact at least 10 times during their journey. "Do you think they'll treat us differently?" Jake shrugged. "Probably. We're the new kids in a very old school. The academy had trained military officers, diplomats, and scientists from across the galaxy for over 200 years. Humans had only made first contact with the Coalition 15 years ago. Jake knew they would stand out, and not just because of their appearance. The ship landed on a platform where dozens of other cadets were arriving. Jake saw insectoid creatures with iridescent shells, tall blue-skinned humanoids, and small furry beings that floated rather than walked. But the group that caught his attention immediately was standing near the main building. 6 large, wolf-like creatures with silver fur and golden eyes watched the new arrivals with an intensity that made Jake's instincts prickle. "Carthians," Katie whispered, following his gaze. "I read about them. Apex predators from a high-gravity world. They're supposed to be some of the best warriors in the galaxy." The Carthians were impressive. They stood on 2 legs like humans but moved with a predator's grace. Their faces were distinctly canine, with long snouts and sharp teeth that showed when they spoke. These particular Carthians were young, probably teenagers by their species standards, but they were already larger than most humans. A floating drone approached Jake and Katie, projecting a holographic map. "Human cadets Morrison and Stevens, please proceed to Dormitory 7, Section C. Your orientation begins in 2 hours." The dormitory building was comfortable enough, with rooms designed to accommodate various species. Jake's room had a normal bed, a desk, and a window overlooking one of the academy's training fields. He was unpacking his few belongings when Katie knocked on his door. "Have you seen them?" she asked, looking worried. "Seen who?" "The Carthian cubs. They're in the dormitory across from ours. I counted 6 of them." Jake joined her at the window. Across a small courtyard, he could see into the windows of another building. The young Carthians were there, moving around their common area. As Jake watched, one of them looked directly at him. The creature's golden eyes locked onto Jake's for a long moment before it turned away. "They're just other students," Jake said. But something about the exchange bothered him. The orientation was overwhelming. Dean Pellax, an insectoid administrator with a translator device attached to his thorax, explained the academy's rules and expectations. There were 73 species represented among the students, each with different dietary needs, sleep cycles, and cultural practices. The humans were assigned to classes in combat theory, xenobiology, and coalition law. "The academy operates on a merit-based hierarchy," Dean Pellax explained. "Species distinctions are irrelevant here. Strength, intelligence, and determination define your place." Jake noticed that many students kept glancing at him and Katie during the presentation. Some seemed curious, others skeptical. The Carthian cubs sat together in one section, whispering among themselves in their growling language. The first few days passed quickly. Jake found the classes fascinating, though he struggled with some of the advanced technology. Katie excelled in xenobiology, quickly becoming one of the top students. They made a few acquaintances among the other cadets, though no real friends yet. The Carthians kept their distance, but Jake often felt their eyes on him. On the 4th night, Jake woke to a sound that made his blood run cold. It started low, almost below hearing, then rose into a haunting howl that echoed across the courtyard. He sat up in bed, his heart pounding. The howl came again, joined by others, multiple voices creating a chorus that spoke of wild places and ancient hunts. Jake went to his window. In the courtyard between the dormitories, he could see 6 shapes moving in the darkness. The Carthian cubs were there, their heads thrown back as they howled at Veros Prime's 3 moons. The howling continued for nearly an hour before finally stopping. Jake tried to sleep but found it difficult. The next morning, Katie looked exhausted. "Did you hear them?" she asked over breakfast in the cafeteria. "The whole dormitory heard them," Jake replied. Several other human students sat nearby, all looking tired and irritable. The howling became a nightly occurrence. Each evening, just after lights out, the Carthian cubs would gather in the courtyard and howl. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes longer. Jake asked other students if this bothered them, but most of the alien species seemed unconcerned. The Viridians can hibernate through anything, one floating student explained, and the crystalline people don't sleep at all. Perhaps humans are simply too sensitive. On the sixth night, the howling was accompanied by new sounds. Jake heard scratching at the dormitory's exterior walls and heavy footsteps in the hallways. When he checked the security camera feed from his datapad, he saw the Carthian cubs prowling around the human dormitory's entrance. They weren't trying to enter, but their presence was clearly a message. Katie came to Jake's room the next morning with dark circles under her eyes. "I'm going to file a complaint with Dean Pellax. This is harassment. We can't function without sleep." "Give me one more night," Jake said. "Why?" "What are you going to do?" "I'm not sure yet, but I think I understand what's happening." Jake had spent his free time observing the Carthian cubs during training sessions. He watched how they moved, how they interacted with each other, how they responded to their instructors. Everyone said the Carthians were establishing dominance, proving they were superior to the weak humans. But Jake had grown up on a ranch in Montana, working with animals his whole life. He knew the difference between aggression and something else. The Carthian cubs weren't acting like bullies. They were acting like confused young animals testing boundaries. That evening, Jake skipped dinner. He sat in his room and waited. When the 3 moons rose over the academy, the howling began right on schedule. Jake listened to the pattern, the rhythm, the tone. Then he stood up, pulled on his jacket, and walked to the dormitory's main entrance. Katie tried to stop him. "Jake, what are you doing?" "They could hurt you?" "They could," Jake agreed. "But they won't." He stepped out into the courtyard. The howling stopped immediately. 6 pairs of golden eyes turned toward him, reflecting the moonlight. The largest of the cubs, the one Jake had seen watching him from the window on that first day, stepped forward. Its lips pulled back, showing teeth designed to tear through armor and bone. Jake walked forward until he stood in the center of the courtyard. The cubs surrounded him, circling slowly. He could hear their low growls, smell their wild scent. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to fight, to do something. Instead, Jake sat down cross-legged on the cold ground and waited to see what would happen next. The courtyard fell silent except for the sound of breathing. Jake's own breath came steady and controlled. While the Carthian cubs panted with excitement or confusion, he couldn't tell which. The largest cub, the leader, moved closer. Jake could see the individual hairs in its silver fur, could count the whiskers on its wolf-like snout. The cub lowered its head, bringing its face level with Jake's. This close, Jake could see that its golden eyes weren't filled with rage or hatred. They showed uncertainty, curiosity, and something that looked almost like loneliness. The cub's hot breath washed over Jake's face, carrying the scent of meat and something wild he couldn't identify. Jake didn't move. He kept his body relaxed, his hands resting loosely on his knees. He had learned long ago that animals could sense fear and tension. They responded to calm confidence better than any show of force. The cub sniffed at Jake's hair, his face, his hands. The other 5 cubs watched intently, waiting to see what their leader would do. Jake heard movement from the dormitory behind him. Other students were watching from the windows, but he couldn't afford to look away now. "Easy," Jake said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not here to fight you." The Carthian language was all growls and barks, nothing like human speech. But tone was universal. Jake kept his voice low and soothing, the same way he used to talk to nervous horses back on his family's ranch. The cub's ears twitched, swiveling toward the sound. Jake slowly raised one hand, keeping his movements smooth and predictable. He held his palm down and extended it toward the cub. The creature jerked back slightly, then paused. Jake waited. Patience was everything in moments like this. He had once spent 3 hours sitting motionless while a wild fox decided whether to trust him. The cub leaned forward again and pressed its nose against Jake's palm. Its nose was cold and wet, just like a dog's. The cub sniffed thoroughly, learning Jake's scent. Then it did something unexpected. It pressed the top of its head against Jake's hand. Jake recognized the gesture. He had seen dogs do it 1,000 times. It was a request, an invitation. Slowly, carefully, Jake moved his fingers and scratched behind the cub's ear. The creature's eyes half closed and a rumbling sound came from deep in its chest. Not a growl, a purr or something like it. The other cubs reacted immediately. They surged forward, not attacking but investigating. Jake found himself surrounded by enormous predators, all of them sniffing and examining him. One nuzzled his shoulder. Another pressed against his back. The leader remained in front of him, still enjoying the ear scratch. Okay, Jake said, his voice still quiet. One at a time. He gave each cub attention, letting them smell him, touching them gently. Their fur was coarser than a dog's, more like a wolf's thick coat. Under the fur, he could feel powerful muscles. Any one of these cubs could kill him easily if it wanted to. But they didn't want to. That was the key insight. They weren't trying to dominate the humans. They were trying to connect. Jake thought about what he knew of Carthian culture. They were warriors, raised from childhood for combat. These cubs had been sent away from their families young to attend the academy. They lived together, trained together, but they were separated from their packs, their parents, their homeworld. They were homesick. They were lonely. And they didn't know how to express it except through the behaviors programmed into them by millions of years of evolution. The howling hadn't been a threat. It had been a call, an attempt to establish connection, to find their place in this strange environment full of aliens who didn't understand them. Jake stood up slowly. The cubs moved back to give him room, but they didn't leave. They watched him expectantly, like dogs waiting for a command. Jake looked at the leader, the largest cub, and made a decision. You need rules, he said. You need structure. That's what you've been looking for, isn't it? The cub tilted its head, not understanding the words but responding to the tone. Jake pointed at the ground near his feet. Here, he said firmly. Then he used a word he had taught to dozens of animals over the years, a simple command that transcended species. Sleep. He put authority in his voice, not anger or aggression, just certainty. He projected the calm confidence of someone who expected to be obeyed because he knew what was best. The leader cub stared at him for a long moment. Jake held its gaze, not challenging, just steady. Then the cub lay down where Jake had pointed. It circled once, twice, then settled into a resting position with its head on its paws. The other 5 cubs looked at their leader, then at Jake. One by one, they lay down as well, forming a loose circle around Jake's feet. Within minutes, their breathing had slowed. They weren't fully asleep, but they were resting, relaxed for the first time since Jake had been watching them. Jake carefully stepped over the resting cubs and walked back toward the dormitory. He half expected them to jump up and follow, but they remained where they were. When he reached the entrance, he looked back. 6 pairs of golden eyes watched him go, but there was no hostility in them now, just acceptance. Katie met him at the door, her eyes wide. How did you do that? I didn't do anything special, Jake said. I just listened to what they were really trying to say. But they're Carthians. They're warriors. They're supposed to be. They're children, Jake interrupted. Young, scared children far from home trying to figure out where they belong. Being a warrior doesn't mean you don't have feelings. That night, the dormitory was quiet. The Carthian cubs slept in the courtyard, their soft breathing the only sound. Jake lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what would happen in the morning. He had acted on instinct, following his experience with animals rather than any knowledge of alien psychology. It might have been incredibly stupid. It might have been brilliant. He wouldn't know until tomorrow, but for the first time since arriving at the academy, Jake felt like he understood his place here. Humans might not be the strongest species or the smartest or the most advanced, but they had something else, something special that came from their unique history. They knew how to make friends with creatures completely different from themselves. They knew how to bridge the gap between species, to find common ground where others saw only differences. As Jake drifted off to sleep, he heard a soft howl from the courtyard. But this time it wasn't the haunting, lonely sound from before. It was quieter, more peaceful. A good-night call. From his room, Jake smiled and closed his eyes. Jake woke to sunlight streaming through his window and the sound of voices outside. Lots of voices. He dressed quickly and stepped into the hallway where other human students were gathered at the windows. Staring down at the courtyard, the 6 Carthian cubs were still there, lying in the same spots where Jake had left them. But now they weren't alone. A crowd of students from various species had gathered to watch them. More importantly, several instructors stood at the edge of the courtyard, including Commander Vorik, the Carthian military tactics teacher. Katie grabbed Jake's arm as soon as she saw him. You need to see this. Everyone's talking about what you did. What I did was try to get some sleep, Jake said, but his stomach was tight with nervousness. He hadn't considered how the Carthian instructors might react to a human giving orders to their students. Come on, Katie said, pulling him toward the exit. When Jake stepped into the courtyard, conversation stopped. All eyes turned toward him. The 6 cubs immediately jumped to their feet, their tails wagging slightly. The leader bounded over to Jake and pressed its head against his chest in greeting. Commander Vorik approached, his face unreadable. He was much larger than the cubs, his silver fur marked with scars from old battles. His golden eyes studied Jake with an intensity that made the young human want to step back. But Jake held his ground. Human Cadet Morrison, Vorik said, his voice a deep growl that the translator rendered into flat, emotionless words. Explain what occurred here last night. Jake glanced at the cubs, who were now sitting attentively around him. They were howling every night, sir, keeping everyone awake. I came out to talk to them. Talk to them, Vorik repeated. You speak Carthian? No, sir. But communication isn't just about words. Vorik's ears flattened against his head, a sign Jake couldn't interpret. Anger? Confusion? These cubs are warriors in training. They were establishing dominance over weaker species, as is proper. You should have submitted or challenged them to combat. Instead, you did something that should be impossible. What's impossible about it, sir? You made them obey you, Vorik said. You have no rank, no status in Carthian hierarchy. You have no physical advantages. Yet they responded to your command as if you were their pack leader. He leaned closer. How? Jake thought carefully about his answer. Where I come from, sir, we have animals called dogs. They're descended from wolves, which are pack hunters like Carthians. Thousands of years ago, humans and wolves formed a partnership. We learned to understand each other, to work together. Over time, wolves evolved into dogs and they became our closest companions. Domestication, Vorik said, making the word sound like an insult. You turned proud hunters into pets. No, sir. We made them into partners. Dogs aren't slaves or possessions. They're family members. We take care of them and they take care of us. It's a relationship built on trust and mutual benefit. Dean Pellex floated forward on his anti-gravity platform. Commander Vorik, this is fascinating. Humans have documented relationships with hundreds of Earth species. They've partnered with animals for transportation, hunting, protection, companionship, and more. Impossible, Vorik snorted. Animals are either prey or competition. They cannot be trusted. Maybe that's true for most species, Jake said carefully. But humans learned different lessons. We learned that understanding another creature, even one very different from us, creates possibilities that pure dominance never could. One of the cubs, a slightly smaller one with a notch in its ear, approached Vorik and whined softly. The commander looked down at his student and his expression softened slightly. He reached down and patted the cub's head, a gesture that looked almost human. These cubs were separated from their families at age 5, Vorik said quietly. It is our way. They must learn to be warriors without the weakness of parental attachment. They must become strong. With respect, sir, Jake said, they are strong. But strength and loneliness aren't the same thing. They weren't trying to dominate us. They were trying to connect. Vorik was silent for a long moment. Around them, students whispered to each other in a dozen different languages. Finally, the commander spoke. Show me. Demonstrate this human ability, Jake nodded. He turned to the 6 cubs and gestured for them to come closer. They immediately responded, gathering around him. Sit, Jake said, using a firm but gentle tone. The cubs sat, their attention focused entirely on Jake. These aren't tricks, Jake explained. These are social behaviors. They're responding to clear communication and consistent expectations. Watch their body language. Their ears are forward, showing interest. Their tails are relaxed but alert. They're not afraid of me, and I'm not afraid of them. We're just 2 different species learning to understand each other. He had the cubs perform several simple behaviors. Stand, lie down, stay, come. With each command, the cubs responded eagerly. They seemed to enjoy having clear instructions, knowing what was expected of them. This is extraordinary, Dean Pellex said. Commander Vorik, your thoughts? Vorik watched his students with an expression Jake couldn't read. I have trained young warriors for 30 years. I have taught them combat, strategy, survival, but I never considered that they might need something more than strength. He looked directly at Jake. Human, these cubs have been difficult since arriving at the academy. They are aggressive, unfocused, disobedient. In 3 days you have done what I could not do in 3 months. I didn't train them, sir. I just gave them what they needed, which was someone to trust, someone to set boundaries, someone to tell them they were going to be okay. Jake paused. Permission to be young. Vorik made a sound that the translator couldn't render. You have given me much to think about. Dean Pellax, I wish to request that human cadet Morrison assist with the Carthian youth training program. I'm not qualified, Jake protested. I'm just a first-year student. You are qualified in ways our current instructors are not, Vorik said. You possess knowledge my species has never developed. If humans can truly bond with apex predators, then perhaps we Carthians have been teaching strength wrong all these years. Dean Pellax's translator buzzed with what might have been excitement. This is exactly why we accepted humans into the academy. You bring perspectives we never considered. Cadet Morrison, I'm officially assigning you to work with Commander Vorik 2 afternoons per week. Cadet Stevens, your xenobiology background would also be valuable. Are you interested? Katie, who had been watching everything with wide eyes, nodded eagerly. Yes, absolutely. The crowd began to disperse, students heading to their morning classes. But many of them looked at Jake differently now, with curiosity rather than skepticism. The 6 Carthian cubs remained close to him, clearly not wanting to leave. Go on, Jake told them. Go to your classes. I'll see you later. The cubs hesitated, then slowly walked toward Commander Vorik. The leader looked back once, and Jake waved. The cub's tail wagged, and then they were gone. Jake stood in the empty courtyard, Katie beside him, and wondered what he had started. 3 weeks passed, and Jake's life at the academy transformed completely. His work with the Carthian cubs had attracted attention from across the campus. Students from other species began approaching him with questions about their own relationships with animals on their home worlds. Katie helped him research different alien species' approaches to fauna, and they discovered something remarkable. Most spacefaring species had very limited interaction with other animals on their planets. The Viridians had eliminated all large predators from their world thousands of years ago. The crystalline people had evolved on a planet with almost no animal life at all. The floating aerials viewed ground-dwelling creatures with a mixture of fear and disgust. Humans were unique. They had not only survived alongside dangerous predators, but had actively sought to understand and partner with them. Look at this, Katie said one evening in the library, her datapad displaying a chart. Earth has over 5,000 years of documented animal domestication. Cats, dogs, horses, cattle, chickens, bees, even fish. No other species in the coalition has anything close to that history. Jake was reading about Carthian child-rearing practices. It makes sense when you think about it. Most intelligent species became dominant on their planets by outcompeting other animals. They either hunted them to extinction or drove them away. Humans took a different path. Because we had to, Katie said. Early humans weren't the strongest or fastest predators. We survived by being smart and social. We made allies wherever we could find them. The door to the library opened and Commander Vorik entered. The massive Carthian had to duck through the doorway. Cadet Morrison, I need your assistance. Jake stood immediately. What's wrong, sir? The cubs. They have stopped eating. Jake and Katie followed Vorik to the Carthian dormitory. Inside the common area, the 6 cubs lay in various positions around the room, looking listless and depressed. When they saw Jake, their ears perked up slightly, but they didn't rise. How long has this been going on? Jake asked. 3 days, Vorik said. They are drinking water but refusing food. The medical staff can find no physical illness. Jake knelt beside the leader cub, the one he had started calling Zrel in his mind, though he had never asked the creature's actual name. Zrel looked at him with dull eyes. They're depressed, Jake said. Homesick, maybe? Commander, how often do Carthian cubs communicate with their families? Vorik's ears flattened. They do not. Once a young warrior enters training, contact with parents is severed. Attachment is weakness. Or, Katie said carefully, attachment is what gives you something to fight for. Jake stroked Zrel's head. The cub leaned into the touch but showed no real enthusiasm. Sir, on Earth, even military dogs need downtime. They need play, rest, and connection. These cubs have been in training mode constantly for months. They need a break. Warriors do not take breaks, Vorik said firmly. Then maybe that's the problem, Jake replied. He stood and faced the commander. Sir, I'm not trying to disrespect your culture. But I've been watching the cubs train. They're exhausted. They're trying so hard to be perfect warriors that they're forgetting how to just be themselves. Vorik's golden eyes narrowed. What do you propose? Let them be kids for a day. Let them play, run around, do things that have nothing to do with combat training. Let them remember why they're training to be warriors in the first place. Ridiculous, Vorik said, but he didn't sound entirely convinced. Dean Pellax appeared in the doorway. Commander, might I remind you that the Coalition values innovation? The human cadets have already demonstrated unique abilities. Perhaps we should explore their suggestions. Vorik growled, a sound that needed no translation. But after a long moment, he nodded. One day, you may try your approach for one day. If it fails, we return to traditional methods. The next morning, Jake and Katie took the 6 cubs to one of the Academy's wilderness training zones. It was a large area of forest and meadows used for survival exercises. Today, there would be no exercises. Just freedom. At first, the cubs didn't know what to do. They looked to Jake for instructions, for orders, for structure. Jake simply sat down on the grass and smiled. Go on. Go play. Slowly, tentatively, one of the smaller cubs ventured away from the group. It sniffed at a flowering plant, then batted at a flying insect. Another cub joined it, and suddenly they were tumbling together in a playful wrestling match. Within minutes, all 6 cubs were running through the meadow, chasing each other, exploring, playing. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. These were the same creatures who had been listless and depressed hours earlier, now full of energy and joy. Jake and Katie watched from the shade of a tree. Commander Vorik had insisted on observing, though he stood at a distance, his posture rigid. Look at Zrel, Katie said, pointing to the leader cub. Zrel had found a stream and was splashing in the water, snapping at small fish with obvious delight. They're just children, Jake said. Strong, dangerous children who will grow into formidable warriors. But children nonetheless. They need this. The day continued with no structure, no training, no discipline. The cubs explored, played, rested when they were tired, and ate the food Katie had brought with genuine hunger. As the sun began to set, they gathered around Jake and Katie, tired but content. Commander Vorik approached, his expression thoughtful. I have watched warrior cubs for my entire adult life. I have never seen them like this. Happy? Katie suggested. Free, Vorik said. I thought freedom was weakness, but perhaps I was wrong. He sat down, a motion that seemed uncomfortable for him outside of a formal setting. On my homeworld before the wars, before we became a warrior culture, Carthians lived in family packs. Cubs played under the watch of their elders. There was structure, yes, but also joy. We abandoned that way when we reached for the stars. It's not too late to remember it, Jake said. Vorik looked at the 6 cubs, now drowsing in the warm evening air. The Coalition chose Carthians for military roles because we are fierce, loyal, and strong. But we paid a price for that strength. We forgot that warriors must have something worth fighting for beyond victory itself. What changed? Katie asked. Why did Carthian culture shift so dramatically? Fear, Vorik said simply. My ancestors encountered hostile species. They believed that only absolute strength would ensure survival, so we built our entire society around creating perfect warriors. We succeeded, but we lost something in the process. Zrel crawled over to Vorik and laid its head in the commander's lap. Vorik stiffened, then slowly placed his hand on the cub's head. When I was young, my mother used to do this. Before I was sent to warrior training, before I learned that such displays were inappropriate. They're not inappropriate, Jake said. They're necessary. Strength without compassion is just brutality. Warriors need to know love so they understand what they're protecting. The 3 of them sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in Varos Prime's sky. The 6 cubs slept peacefully, their breathing soft and steady. For the first time since arriving at the academy, they looked truly at ease. Tomorrow they will return to training, Vorik said. But I will make changes. If humans can teach an old Carthian new approaches, then perhaps there is hope for both our species. Jake looked at Katie and smiled. They had come to the academy expecting to learn from advanced alien civilizations. Instead, they were teaching lessons humanity had learned thousands of years ago. Lessons about kindness, understanding, and the strength that comes from connection rather than isolation. 6 months had passed since Jake first sat down in the courtyard with the Carthian cubs. The academy had changed in ways no one had predicted. The changes started small, but grew into something much larger. Commander Vorik had redesigned the Carthian training program. Cubs still learned combat and strategy, but now they also had scheduled playtime, rest periods, and regular communication with their families back home. The results were remarkable. The young Carthians performed better in their studies, showed improved teamwork, and reported higher satisfaction with their training. But the real surprise came when other species began requesting similar changes to their programs. Jake sat in Dean Pellex's office with Katie and Commander Vorik. The Dean's insectoid features were difficult to read, but his body language suggested excitement. "We have received a request from the Coalition Council," Pellex said. "There is a situation on a frontier colony world called New Harmony. The human approach may be uniquely suited to resolve it." "What kind of situation?" Katie asked. "A holographic display activated showing a verdant planet with purple oceans. New Harmony was settled by a mixed-species colony 5 years ago. The planet has native fauna, including a species of large predators the colonists call ridge hunters. Recently, the ridge hunters have been entering the colony and attacking settlers." "How many casualties?" Jake asked. 17 injured, 3 killed, Pellex said. "The colonial governor has requested authorization to eliminate the ridge hunter population. However, the coalition has a policy against exterminating native species except as a last resort." Vorik leaned forward. "The governor claims they have tried everything: fences, sonic deterrents, even relocating hundreds of the creatures. Nothing has worked. The attacks continue." "They want us to find another solution," Jake said, understanding dawning. "Correct," Pellex said. "The council believes that human expertise in animal behavior might offer alternatives. This would be a field assignment. You would work with a small team to study the ridge hunters and develop a non-lethal solution." Katie looked at Jake. "This is bigger than helping cubs feel less homesick. These are wild animals, dangerous ones." "I know," Jake said. "But if we don't try, they'll be killed. All of them." 2 weeks later, Jake, Katie, Commander Vorik, and 2 Carthian cubs, Zarel and another named Kara, arrived on New Harmony. The planet was beautiful, with vast forests and mountains that glowed purple in the light of its blue sun. The colony was a cluster of prefabricated buildings surrounded by tall fences topped with energy barriers. Governor Chen met them at the landing pad. He was a tired-looking man with dark circles under his eyes. "You're the animal experts, no offense, but you look like students." "We are students," Katie said. "But we have experience that might help." "We've lost 3 people," Chen said bluntly. "Children. The ridge hunters came right through our fences during the night. They're getting bolder. If you can't stop them in 1 week, I'm authorizing a full extermination." That evening, Jake and the team reviewed footage of the ridge hunters. They were impressive creatures about the size of earth lions but with 6 legs and crystalline horns. They moved in packs and showed clear signs of intelligence. "They're beautiful," Katie said, watching a pack move through the forest. "They're killers," Chen said from the doorway. "Don't romanticize them." "I'm not," Katie replied. "But there has to be a reason they're attacking. Animals don't usually target settlements unless something is wrong." Jake studied the footage carefully. "Governor, when did the attacks start?" "About 4 months ago." "And when did you expand the colony?" Chen frowned. "We finished the new residential sector 5 months ago." "Why?" Jake exchanged looks with Katie. "Can we see a map of the colony expansion and where the attacks have occurred?" When Chen pulled up the map, the pattern was obvious. Every attack had happened near the new residential sector. Jake pointed to a feature on the map. "What's this area here? This valley between the old colony and the new sector?" "That? It's just empty land. We were going to develop it next year." "It's not empty," Jake said. "I bet it's a ridge hunter migration route, maybe a breeding ground. When you expanded, you cut them off from something important." The next day, Jake and Vorik went into the wilderness with tracking equipment. Zarel and Kara came along, their keen senses helping detect ridge hunter scent trails. It took 3 days of careful observation, but Jake's theory proved correct. The valley was a breeding ground. Female ridge hunters came there to give birth, protected by the pack. The colony expansion had placed buildings directly in the path the Ridge Hunters used to reach this area. The attacks weren't random violence, they were desperate attempts to reach their young. Their mothers, Katie said, watching footage of a Ridge Hunter that had been killed after an attack. They're trying to get to their babies. Jake presented the findings to Governor Chen. You're not dealing with mindless predators. You're dealing with intelligent creatures defending their families. They're scared and confused because their territory has been invaded. So what do you suggest? Chen asked. We can't just abandon the new residential sector. You don't have to, Jake said. But you need to give them a clear path to their breeding grounds. Look at the map. If you relocate 3 buildings and create a corridor here, the Ridge Hunters can pass through without entering populated areas. That's expensive, Chen protested. Not as expensive as constant security, medical care, and the eventual cost of extermination, Katie pointed out. Plus, you'd be destroying a unique species. There's more, Jake added. Ridge Hunters are pack animals. If we can establish communication, they might even be assets to the colony. They could warn you about other dangers, help control pest species. Chen looked skeptical. You want to make friends with the things that killed our people? I want to turn enemies into neighbors, Jake said. It's worked before. Convincing the governor took time, but eventually, Chen agreed to try Jake's plan. The colony relocated the necessary buildings and created a natural corridor through their territory. But that was just the first step. Jake, with Vorik and the cubs, began the careful process of establishing contact with the Ridge Hunters. They left food at the edge of the corridor, not as bait but as a peace offering. They used recorders to play sounds that indicated non-aggression. They set up observation posts where the Ridge Hunters could see them but keep their distance. It took 3 weeks of patient work. Then one evening, a Ridge Hunter approached Jake's observation post. It was a large female, clearly one of the pack leaders. She stopped at the edge of the clearing, her crystalline horns catching the setting sun. Jake stood slowly, keeping his hands visible and his posture non-threatening. He spoke softly, not words the creature could understand, but tone it could recognize. Calm, peaceful, respectful. The Ridge Hunter tilted her head, studying him. Then she made a low sound, almost musical, and turned away. She walked into the corridor the colony had created, moving toward the valley beyond. As she passed through, she looked back once, and Jake felt certain she understood. After that night, the attacks stopped completely. The Ridge Hunters used the corridor regularly, passing through the colony territory without incident. Some of the colonists reported seeing the creatures watching their children play from a distance, protective rather than threatening. Governor Chen called Jake to his office 1 month after the corridor opened. I owe you an apology, and so does everyone in this colony. You saved lives on both sides. We just helped everyone understand each other, Jake said. When Jake and the team returned to the academy, they found themselves minor celebrities. News of the New Harmony's success had spread throughout the coalition. Requests came in from other colonies facing similar issues with native fauna. Dean Pellax offered Jake and Katie advanced positions in a new department, interspecies relations. You have demonstrated abilities the coalition desperately needs, he said. You show us that intelligence comes in many forms and that understanding bridges gaps that force never could. On their last night of the term, Jake stood in the courtyard where everything had started. The 6 Carthian cubs, now larger and more confident, lay around him like they had that first night. But now they slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were valued not just as warriors but as individuals. Katie joined him, looking up at the 3 moons. We came here thinking we were the students. Turns out we were also the teachers. Everyone's both, Jake said. That's what makes learning work. Zrel raised his head and made a soft, contented sound. Jake scratched behind the Carthian's ears, and the creature's tail wagged slowly. You know what the best part is? Jake said. Back on Earth, when humans first domesticated wolves, those ancient people had no idea they were starting something that would eventually help bring peace to alien worlds. They just knew that making friends was better than making enemies. Maybe that's humanity's real gift to the galaxy, Katie said. Not technology or weapons or even intelligence. just the simple idea that former enemies can become family. Above them, the stars shone bright, each one potentially holding worlds, where different species lived, fought, and maybe, with a little help, learned to understand each other. Zrel pressed closer to Jake and closed his eyes. Around the courtyard,